رسوله النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، والدعاء إلى الخير والدلالة على الهدى ابتغاء وجهه سبحانه وتعالى وثوابه وقربه. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وهب لنا حكما والحقنا بالصالحين وعلمنا التأويل وفقهنا في الدين واهدنا سواء السبيل برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك، فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في النبيين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها وأنت خير الوارثين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. We praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to see one of the sacred months, the month of Dhul Qa'dah, which is then followed by the sacred month of Dhul Hijjah, followed again by the sacred month Al-Muharram. And then the fourth sacred month is the month of Rajab. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revered and mentioned about the sacred months in the Quran. And we remind ourselves to also attach importance to these sacred months. The Arabs of the past, even in the times of Jahiliyyah, because these were the sacred months of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is known from the previous religions, even though they were at war with each other, but when the sacred months came, they would stop warring with each other. And there was a sort of veneration that they would attach to it. And the Hujjaj already start preparing for Hajj from Ramadan. Many people, their preparation for Hajj is first and foremost with regards to visas and applications, but there's also a mental and spiritual preparation. First and foremost, understanding the rulings of Hajj, the fiqh of Hajj, of what is important, and then perusing the books. For example, the chapter on the secrets of Hajj by Imam Ghazali in the Ihya Ulumuddin, which is an easy read. It's a self-read for people. Also, many of the mashayikh, there is the Fadail al-Hajj of Maulana Muhammad Zakaria Kandahlawi. There are also books on Hajj specifically written by many ulama, right, with regards to the fiqh of Hajj. And then what's also interesting to read for people is to read the stories of how the awliya performed Hajj. Because there is the Hajj that people perform, which is the general masses, but then there is the Hajj of how the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala performed Hajj. And day before yesterday, the 7th of Dhul Qa'dah, was the date of the death of Imam al-Haddad. And in the past, I would find with the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, and not just the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but many people in the past, they were not able to perform Umrah and Hajj as often as perhaps some of us might be afforded that ability today. Right? Some of them, the Hajj and the Umrah that they performed was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Right? And they saved up, or they went for Hajj and they came back, and that was the only time they would ever have visited the sacred precincts. Imam al-Haddad as well, he only ever left Hadramaut. He never ever traveled anywhere else in the entire world besides Hadramaut, where in Tarim, obviously he was born in Tarim. He traveled in and around Hadramaut, and he went for Hajj. On the way for Hajj, obviously he passed by Mukalla, and then he went via Aden and then Hudaydah, going all the way up to Saudi Arabia, or what's known as Saudi Arabia today. And other than that, he never traveled to any other place in the world. Yet we can see the legacy that him and the likes of him have left, in that there is probably not a country in the world that people who are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are aware of his works. And he speaks about his Hajj, right? And people have also that spent time with him have written about his Hajj. And there is a science in the Islamic legacy which unfortunately has died out, and in the Western world obviously people don't really pay much attention to it, right? But we would find in the past that people that kept the company of the mashayikh and the ulama, they would write their experiences, even if it was a simple trip. For example, if they went for a da'wah trip for a few days, right, they would document something of memoirs about what happened, and they would detail every single thing that happened, even they met this particular person, they greeted this one, they came across this particular event, they gave ijazah to this person, or they received ijazah from this particular person. And this is a genre of Islamic science in its own right? The collection of the memoirs of people that wrote about the company and wrote about the time that they spent with, whether it was ulama, and especially during travels, because what they mention in travels, and by the way, sometimes is very different from what is mentioned in lessons. And sometimes people benefit from being in the company of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ulama when on travel more than they do in their classes. The interesting thing about traveling is that you are in the company of someone for an extended period of time. So if you want to discuss a certain matter with someone and they come and visit you at your home, the most you'll sit with them is 1 or 2 hours. But if you're traveling, for example, from Tarim to Mukalla, right, you have 5 hours in the car. And obviously, if you were traveling back in the days in the past, you had months with people and weeks with people. And so there's also an amicability that develops and an understanding. And sometimes when it comes to discussing sensitive issues, it requires a lot of time. And so part of the da'wah which the mashayikh would also do is they would go for these trips, these long trips, and they would take people along with them. And then that would also develop the sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. And we need to remind people in today's times about the duty of da'wah, about calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it becomes important even in the age of technology, and it's possible to transmit one's lessons and teachings or anything over vast differences, but it's very important for people to also go and travel. And many of us are doing these things already when we travel, for example, for holiday, or we go to different places. Right? If we change the intention or add the intention of traveling for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But with the intention of meeting people for the sake of Allah. And there is a spiritual benefit which one gets in these types of trips, which one also won't find in their forms of ibadah. And many of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what they would do in their routines, and we know our routines can become mundane, even those that are teaching in institutes and those that are teaching, for example, daily lessons, it becomes monotonous after a while. And so to break that monotony on a monthly basis, some of them on a weekly basis, they would go out and spend time in a different locality, do some programs, even if it was just for the sake of their own ibadah. Break that monotony, come back and revive. And in today's times, when we're speaking about the approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are up and down. Right? One day we're up, one day we're down. One day the social media gets us, one day we get it. And the Mashaykh would say it's okay to be hit down, it's okay to be knocked down once or twice, right? But you can't be taking a knock all the time. You're losing each and every single round. You got to be winning some rounds as well, right? We're continuing with the book, the title Secrets of Those Drawn Near, and we've reached the section on page 26 in which the author is mentioning about paying attention to what he has mentioned about lowering one's status in the eyes of people and being content with not having status in people's eyes. And the sign of not wanting status in people's eyes is that a person doesn't do things for the sake of name and fame, but that's still not enough. A person might hide their actions. They might go out of their way to perhaps in their own mind think that they are staying away from name and fame. And there are many manifestations of seeking name and fame which we might be aware of and which we might not be aware of, right? But it's the desire to want to control people's hearts, the desire to want to have a position in people's hearts. That is the definition of what status is. Seeking status is we want people to notice us. But more than that, we want to control their hearts in their appreciation of us. And the way of the people of Allah is the exact opposite. Unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, right, allows that. And this is mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. There are two types of status. There is the status which the world gives to people, or which people give themselves, which is still worldly. And then there is status which is otherworldly, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. And what is that status? This is mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves someone, then he calls Jibreel alayhi salam and says, "Oh Jibreel, I love so and so. So you love him or her." And then Jibreel alayhi salam calls out to all the angels and the heavenly bodies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves so and so, so you all love him. And then the hadith says, ثُمَّ يُوضَعُ لَهُ الْقَبُولِ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places acceptance for him on the earth. This is divine status or divinely granted status, right? And also the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have even seen and spent time with them as well, it doesn't even make a difference to them, right? And until praise and disparagement becomes equal in a person's eyes, right, then there is still not a solid foundation to build on. If the spiritual foundation is based upon gold and dust becoming equal in one's eyes, then with regards to status, being praised by someone and being disparaged, sworn at, spoken at, backbited about, has to be exactly the same. And one has to stop wanting to try and defend the image that they have in people's eyes. Because which is the only image of a person that matters? It's the one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, but that's still not enough. Imam Ghazali says, so a person hides and they do actions quietly and they don't want to be known, but somehow against their will, something of their actions becomes public, or people find out about something that they were doing privately, perhaps a certain project that they were sponsoring, or a certain form of ibadah that they were doing, or someone speaks about. He says, now when people find out, is your heart happy or is your heart upset? Are you happy that people now have discovered something about you? And if there is an inclination of being happy that people found out something, he says, still there was no sincerity there. And do we actually dislike, for example, when a person's actions were found out, do we dislike it? And to what extent do we dislike it? Let's look at the stories of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there was a slave that was being sold in the marketplace. And the owner came, he was being sold, and someone came to buy a slave. And so he looked at this particular slave, and he was involved in some sort of ibadah and worship. So he asked the person who was selling the slaves, I want this particular one. He says, this one is so lazy. He doesn't work. He spends most of his time just in ibadah and dhikr, right? He does get the job done, but you're not going to benefit much. He says, I'll take him. And then as they were going and they were traveling, going back to the land that they came from, this person noticed that whenever this slave made dua, his dua was accepted, right? And there was a drought in a certain area, and when they performed their ibadah, he heard him at the time of tahajjud making dua for rain, and the next day rain came down. And so when they got back to the land that he was from, he told the slave and he says, what is the secret between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that your du'as are accepted? He says, what do you mean? He says, I've been noticing you and I've seen that your du'as are accepted. And you seem to have a state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wants to learn from him to benefit. He says, is that what you saw? He says, yes. He says, okay, give me 2 minutes. I just want to, not 2 minutes, let me perform 2 rakats of salah. Right? And then he performed 2 rakats of salah, and this person hears him saying in his sajda, Ya Allah, that secret that was between you and me has now become exposed, so take me towards you now. And he made dua, and in his sajda, he passed away. Right? The extent of disliking to be known was that we would prefer to die than people to know the secret that. And how different is this for people who want to take a spiritual path, right? Even with all these things of not wanting to be known, or the claims of not wanting to be known and leaving the dunya, but so that it can be said of this person that he is someone of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is a person of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if the path to sincerity is accusing ourselves of insincerity, then we all have to take ourselves to account. And therefore they say sincerity is a secret of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only He knows truly the extent of what sincerity is. And so the author then says, whoever sees, or he quotes one of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is saying, whoever sees status in himself has none, meaning has no status. And they would also say that whoever desires to be known, then they do not know the meaning of sincerity. If there is still a desire to want to be known, then there is no sincerity. What does this mean? Age of social media, in the age where everyone is posting themselves, and the whole wave of society is there to want to be known, right? In every aspect, in business, right? Whether it's even to an extent of what a person, the plate of food that a person is eating, he wants everyone to know. What does this mean? It means a person has to go against the grain, right? And they really have to bury themselves in the ground. They have to bury themselves in the ground of obscurity and taste the bitterness of not wanting, especially in Imam Ghazali himself speaks about this, his own mujahada of running away. Why did he run away from what he was doing? He was the most prominent scholar of his time. There used to be thousands and thousands, his gatherings where he used to teach, there used to be thousands, not of ordinary people, thousands of scholars that would come at his feet. Right? The Madrasa Nizamiya, he was running, or he was the head teacher of the greatest madrasa at the time. And there's an interesting story, it's translated into English, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, deliverance from error. Imam Ghazali speaks about how this time, and he became extremely ill, and even the doctors weren't able to cure him. And they told him this is a spiritual disease. And then he realizes, and he writes, he says, I realized that everything I was doing up to that point, and he was an established scholar, he was an alim, right? He knew the inner and outer workings of the Sharia, but he says, I realized that everything I was doing was for name and for fame. And so he gives the impression to everyone in his family that he's going for Hajj, right? But then he goes to Damascus, and he spends 10 years in khalwa, 10 years in complete seclusion, sitting in the minarat of the Masjid al-Amawi that is there, and obviously visiting the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are also narrations of him spending time in the jungles and forests, right, of this internal mujahada. And he writes, and he says he'd be sitting sometimes in the Masjid al-Amawi, obscurely, no one knows who he is, right? But his fame had spread far and wide. And he hears scholars discussing his works, the same works that he wrote. And they are arguing and debating about what is the intent of the author. He says, no, Imam Ghazali meant this here. And the other one says, no, this is his intention. He meant this here. Look at how this sentence is. And he's sitting there and he's listening. What's the natural impetus? Right? You want to go and tell people no. And he remains quiet. That he can't even be known. Right? And obviously then, and even at the end of his life, he only kept a small handful of people around him. His sincere students. And he says, you are the only ones that I want to keep. And there's an interesting way, even how Imam al-Ghazali, when the time for his death came, he made wudu. He donned himself even into his the garbs that he wanted to pass away in. He lied down, right, read whatever he needed to, and he was prepared for the time of death. And then even at the end of his life, he says even all these spiritual stations and the names that are given to all these different forms of spiritual stations, sometimes they refer to them by names of certain women as a means of allusion, right? They would talk of spiritual station. They would say, so Imam al-Haddad also, he has a famous poem, and he says, أنا مشغول بليلى عن جميع القول جملة. I am involved, I am busy with Layla, right? I'm busy with Layla, and I've forgotten everything else in the universe. And obviously people that read this, they shouldn't think he's talking about a lady. Layla is the name of his spiritual station. Those that obviously have access, that understand what he's referring to, right? Layla and Su'da and Lubna. And so Imam al-Ghazali would even say, Taraktul Su'da wa Lubna, or Taraktul Layla wa Lubna. He says, I've even left these spiritual stations. I don't even want spiritual stations anymore, right? I just want to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that I am in a safe zone. And one has to reach that point through experiential training. Because one can say, yes, I don't want spiritual stations, but one cannot purify themselves from the dunya until they have something to work towards. Then what are they working towards? They're working proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then only when one gets there, one can start realizing that also this is not the goal. So the author says, know, dear brother or sister or reader, that nothing is more beneficial for you than to reduce the importance you place on status and rank. It relieves you from exhausting pursuits and harmful obsessions that corrupt societal norms and that corrupt societal norms have shackled you. We read this last week. Whoever reflects on this chapter and receives divine assistance to act upon something of it will bring relief to others and to themselves. They will spare themselves much trouble that would only result in them wasting their life in the pursuit of matters that once attained prove to be nothing, leading only to regret and sorrow over a lost life. Such an individual resembles a thirsty person exhausting himself chasing a mirage, believing it to be water, only to find nothing upon arrival. And so when a person also desires to run away from status, they've got to stay away from people. They would stay away from the public eye. But then also the intention should not be that I'm staying away from people because I now want to be known as staying away from people, right? Or I don't want to be known with people, but when I spend private time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the effects of this private time will now become apparent on me. People will see the nur upon me, people will see the state that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so shaitan doesn't leave this person, even when they're in their private moments. And Imam Ghazali also tells us the intention that a person has to have when they want to stay away from people is not that we want to run away from the evils of people. The intention when we don't want to be in the public eye, the intention that we don't want to be on social media, we don't want to be in groups, we don't want to be in contact with people. What is the intention? The intention is we want to prevent our evil from affecting people. We don't want to be an obstacle to people in their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many, many times when we read in the books of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the books of Tasawwuf and of Tazkiyah, they say, stay away from those people who distract you from Allah. And we start thinking, yes, this particular person or that particular person. But how many people aren't we their distraction to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Even just in wasting their time on social media, right? At the time of tahajjud or the time of fajr, we sent a message to someone, right? And perhaps they feel obliged to answer to you, and they might have been involved in some ibadah, or they might have been involved in some sort of worship. We've become a cause of distraction to other people, right? And so the intention to stay away from people is to prevent our evil. To prevent our evil from reaching people. I am such an evil person, Ya Rab. I don't want to be a means of, I don't want to incur your anger by obstructing other people from your path. I need to go into khalwa, right? And the person remains in the state all the time, right? Habib Bakr bin Muhammad from Qirsi in Indonesia, he spent 35 years in khalwa. And there were many of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who entered Imam Faqih Sa'id in the north of Hudaydah, right, towards the later part of his life, right? What did he do? He had 2 wives and he had children. He divorced both his wives, and then he went into the masjid and he remained in i'tikaf in the masjid till the end of his life, and he passed away, right? And so they found only that the rectification of their heart lied where? Running away from the dunya. Some of them would even give up their children, their spouses, right? And obviously everyone's situation is different. One doesn't read and hear about the stories of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they just want to go and blindly emulate them, not knowing with what internal spiritual state they were operating on. So a rational person puts thought before action, building only on a solid foundation to ensure a commendable outcome. What solid foundation? Everything that has passed, right? Everything that is past, about building one's spiritual foundation, not on ibadah, but on breaking the nafs, right? In searching for that sincerity in one's paradigm. A proud person, however, only becomes self-aware after the reins of control have slipped from his hands, regretting when it is too late for regret to do any good, right? What does it mean? The reins have, a person was vying for the dunya, for something of the dunya. Now when he's lost hope, that's only when he starts self-reflecting. Oh, I've only been running after it for this particular thing. Or when a person, unfortunately, becomes exposed. And sometimes exposure also is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person might be doing certain things, he might be, right, deceiving in business, right, or he might be dealing with members of the opposite gender in a way that is unbecoming, etc. Or the host of whatever sins or spiritual diseases a person might have. He might be having hasad and jealousy for people, whatever. Now when he becomes exposed, there is an investigative journalistic article that exposes his deeds or his business practice, or that he was doing this. Now this person starts to regret, and he says, Ya Rabb, forgive me, and he wants to rectify his life. But why only when he was exposed? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was privy to all that he was doing before that. And so this person, why sometimes people are exposed, and nas'alullah salama wal afiyah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and conceal us, right? This person was exposed only because they gave regard to being something or wanting status in people's eyes more than being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so as a mercy, Allah exposed them. Because when a person is exposed, what happens? In an instant, that regard that they have in people's eyes is broken. And so now they truly sincerely know now that what it means to want to do something. So forget about what people say. Now they start building their life. And the benefit when you deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now the entire world looks down, and they might forever, for the rest of the world's life, look down on that person. And if they've corrected their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah could have raised them the very next day or the very next week or the very next month when they made their tawbah sincere to the highest of levels. But now they live knowing what sincerity is. Because people still continue to look down upon them, but it doesn't matter anymore. And the sign of that sincerity is a person then still continues to try their best. Right? They say one of the signs of hypocrisy is that when there are people, then there is an impetus to want to do something. Right? If we know people watching or in public, we have this himmah, this determination to do something. But when there is no people around, then do we still do the same actions we were doing? That's the sign of sincerity. So they would say hypocrisy sometimes, or they would say sometimes fame or wanting to be known is the greatest impetus for action. In this regard, we have to also be aware, because sometimes for the sake of getting things done, and people who understand this, we might also be used by other people because they know we love status, but they use us to get a job done because they know that we love status, and the work needs to get done, so they say, go do this and do that, or whatever it is. And so they'll use your spiritual disease against you. Imam Ghazali also speaks about this. He speaks about this point particularly. He says the Shaykh has a disciple who's just after name and fame. And the Shaykh knows that this person will be destroyed by fame, will be destroyed because his only goal in even studying the deen and studying spirituality, everything is to want to get a name with people. He says, but the land that he is from, or the place he has to go to, there is no one that is working for the deen. And so what do? Do we send him to destroy himself? Right? But in destroying himself, thousands will be saved. Or do we save him and thousands get destroyed? Imam Ghazali says we make him the scapegoat. Rather one person be destroyed and thousands. So even if we are in positions of working for deen, and we should never be deceived. And we have to always be fearful. Am I being used? Right? Am I just being given a rope to hang myself? Right? And a person has to always just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and security. Allah protect us, whether we're sincere or insincere. You conceal us and take us to you in a safe zone. Whatever ought to be worked in people's hearts by us doing what we need to be doing. Ya Allah, you have put us in this position. You work in people's hearts what they need to. Take people to you who need to be taken to you. Let people reach higher stations. But just don't expose us. And don't use us in a way which is giving us rope to hang ourselves. And we would prefer then to just have a quiet life. We prefer then just to live in a way in which we live, we don't hurt people, and we pass away with iman and with deen. To this extent, some of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were even offered great stations. They would give this example. They would say, right, a certain person was offered the highest spiritual stations, but not immediately. If you got up from the place you were sitting and you took few steps, as soon as you walk through the door, all of those spiritual stations will come onto your heart. Or you pass away where you are right now, but guaranteed iman and husn al-khatima. He says husn al-khatima with no spiritual stations. And people asked him, why did you prefer? He says, I don't know in those 2-3 steps what will happen to my heart, whether my heart will remain firm or not firm, right? Or I will be deceived by shaitan, or I will have a sense of arrogance or whatever it is. So they would prefer as-salama wal-afiyah, safety and well-being. Safety and well-being in one's life, worldly life, safety and well-being in one's physical health. Right? One always asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and well-being in one's health, and safety and well-being in one's spiritual state, and safety and well-being in one's deen. Because the spiritual path as well is a dangerous path. Imam al-Haddadi also mentions how many people reached unveiling, the stations of unveiling, and then they were thrown out. And there's tests that come even later. The higher you go, the harder you fall. We find even the Sahaba, many of the Sahaba they faced severe trials. Right? Even though they were close to the Prophet ﷺ, they faced severe trials. The wives of the Prophet ﷺ as well. We see even after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, some of the issues that took place between the Sahaba, severe trials. And obviously we have a good opinion of all the Sahaba, but we can see that, right, with proximity comes its tests. Because when you want gold, you've got to burn the ore, you've got to burn that ore out. When you want juice, you've got to squeeze that orange. Right? Some will say we don't want to be the juice nor the orange. We just want to be a spectator, learn, and get to the other side. Now, therefore, brother or sister or reader, you must strive and exert yourself, because spiritual exercise, riyadha or mujahada, is effective in reaching your goals or bringing you closer to them. And this riyadha, this mujahada, what did we say? The menial tasks, right? Putting ourselves down in front of people, being aware. And as we say, the purity of your heart is only according to the purity of your thoughts. Your thoughts are protected through dhikr, and your thoughts are protected by making excuses for people, being aware of the negative thoughts that come into the heart. The manifestation of the spiritual diseases are the thoughts that come to your mind, right? And one has to conquer their heart, or has to overcome the disease of the heart, by first being aware of what are the thoughts that come to my mind when I look at this person, right? Because if you don't deal with the thoughts, what happens? The thoughts then fester, and then that develops to further worse spiritual disease. So for example, a person might come to a gathering, or they come to a certain, for example, a person might know, and he always sit in a particular, Zubair always sits on this particular chair, maybe his knees, trouble him. So Azhar comes early one day, he knows Zubair sits there, so he starts sitting in the chair, and Zubair comes, he says, Azhar knows I need this chair, it's the only chair in the attics here. I don't know why he does this. What happens? Right? That thought is a manifestation of something in the heart that has to be dealt with. Because if thought is not dealt with, it starts festering, and that leads to what? It leads to a worse spiritual disease, which is hiqd, which is rancor and now hatred in the person's heart. But what needs to happen? So what does Zubair need to do? You need to start, perhaps something happened. He was on the farm today, or whatever, maybe he tripped and fell over, or one of the cows knocked him over, or something like that. Right? And his knees are also troubling him. And you have to make these excuses, even if they are fantastical in our mind. Because shaitan lies to us to cause the spiritual disease. So we've got to lie to ourselves and lie to him to protect the heart from spiritual disease. Meaning, what do you mean lying? Make the excuse. He's probably he stood up the whole night in tahajjud, right? He's come now for the lesson, and his knees are, probably swollen. Look at the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, his legs are swollen, he needs gym more than. And then what would be more appropriate then, instead of having something in the heart, is to come and offer him, can I press your feet for you? Do you need a massage? Or something. We're laughing, obviously, but in the mind, this actually needs to, and there should be nothing wrong to then say, okay, there's nothing wrong in serving and doing khidmah for a person. So this is the mujahada. And this riyadha is what? Before it's physical, it's actually mental. And a lot of the spiritual path, when they say wayfaring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's all just happening in the mind. Right? You can be sitting in one place, and you can be ascending in the stations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another person can be in the depths of a spiritual abyss because of the negatives. One person is sitting there, and he's just thinking about someone, and he said that to me, and I'm going to say this to him tomorrow. And what? When he does, what happened? You're not going anywhere, you're not doing anything, but what's happening to your spiritual state? You're just going down and down. And another person, Ya Allah, forgive me, I did this. A person is putting themselves down in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua for this person. Ya Allah, I might have taken this person's right, I don't know why. And what's happening in that? Where are you going? You're not going anywhere. Right? So the riyadha, the spiritual striving, is where? It's in the mind. And we say in the heart, but the heart, for us to understand, we've got to first think of it in our minds. The spiritual training described earlier is very challenging, but it is beneficial, because through hardships, the desired outcomes are achieved. And if Allah is the goal, then it is the most difficult course. Right? They make obstacle courses in competitions, and they make it difficult because the prize is something special. And so if the prize in the spiritual path is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it is the most difficult, right? But it is also the most easy, for whom Allah makes it easy, right? Simple test: how do we control our anger with our spouses and our children? Because the Prophet also said, the best of you are those who are best to their families. Very simple. And we all know how easy it is or how difficult it is. Easy is the mind, the heart tells, let it slow, let it go. You don't have to mention it. You don't have to shout. You don't have to let it slip. And then nafs just says, you just have to have your say. Right? You just have to. That's how easy or how difficult the spiritual path is. Right? But it is beneficial because through the hardships, the desired outcomes are achieved. Examine this chapter carefully, meaning read it over and over and over, right? Recognize the ailments of your inner self and commit to healing it. Take action, right? The worst thing that can happen when we read books like this is to be able to learn now, mashallah, this new type of knowledge that we've never been aware of, and maybe even start impressing people with talking about things that they've never heard before, but we don't take the effort, right? And it's better for a person not to have read any of this and live with spiritual diseases than to learn about how to cure it, and then one is not able to, one doesn't have the courage. And what is bravery and courage as opposed to cowardliness is with regards to this here. A person that cannot put themselves down in the eyes of people, this is a true coward, right? It takes bravery, it takes strength to withhold anger. And so not being angry is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength, right? Putting oneself down in someone in another person's eyes, especially if you have something in our hearts towards that person, or we know that person has something in their hearts towards us, to humble ourselves. This is where true strength and courage and valor and chivalry is, right? Not in flexing one's muscles and boasting in the ways that one would ought to think that strength comes from. So only after doing this, only then should one contemplate the beneficial knowledge contained in the following chapters of the book. Because now the following chapters of the book are going to talk about, right, different forms of spiritual actions. Indeed, and in the last chapters of the book, he talks about ibadah and dhikr and certain types of du'as you must read and these salahs that we must read, what we would generally think is the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So he says, only after practicing on all of what is past should one contemplate the beneficial knowledge contained in the following chapters of the book. Meaning we're not allowed to read beyond page 27 until we've mastered all the previous pages. Strive to put it into practice, listen, learn, and be a person of high ambition. For the spiritual path is the pursuit of the valiant who truly seek the divine. If we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we are willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if that means our wealth, even if that means our wealth. Even if that's our status, even if that means our status. Even if that means, and generally, right, and this is where we have to stop and say, you know what, perhaps that end goal is not for me, because in the spiritual path, a person will generally be tested with that which their heart is most attached to. The most difficult thing that you have to give up, that is what you have to give up to get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to be honest and say, you know what, perhaps I don't have what it takes. Ibrahim alayhi salam had to do what? He had to sacrifice his own son. We spoke about the story of some of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who went on a journey. He gave up his children, and he gave up his wife, and he went seeking knowledge, etc., etc. Met them after many, many, many years. And the next day they wake up and the wife and the family are dead. They passed away. And he was told in a vision or in a dream that, who are you going to choose? Who has your heart? Is it for Allah? And Allah, and we can see with Ibrahim alayhi salam, the story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells in the Quran of Ibrahim alayhi salam. One, he has to slaughter his son. I mean, which rational person slaughters his sons? But Allah is teaching us that His love is precious. And you must be willing to sacrifice. Who are our Ismails that we are willing? Therefore, even the people of Allah, they would say, I mean, when Udhiyah comes, every year when we slaughter and the Qurbani comes, a person think, what are my things? What are the things that are distracting me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And sometimes a person, depending on, and like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. So sometimes people have to give things up and Allah causes it to come back again to them. Dawood, Ayyub alayhi salam. وَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ. He lost his entire family, all his children, all his wealth. He lost everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? Allah replaced that. He replaced everything. He says we gave him the light and even more. And so with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's nothing that we lose, right? We lose for the sake of mujahada, but then Allah causes it to come back again. And we've seen many, many times as well. Sometimes even people have to give up certain things, and they had to give it up for the sake of giving it up. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returned it to them. But when a person gives it up, they can't give it up that, okay, I'm going to give it up because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to return it. Give it back to me later. Right? You can see how shaitan doesn't leave. This nafs doesn't leave a person at all. Now, gains are proportionate to the risks taken. Right? Gains are proportionate to the risks taken. So the greater we sacrifice for the sake of Allah, the greater we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we say greater, it doesn't have to mean greater in terms of number, but greater in terms of difficulty on the nafs. And therefore, just remaining silent when one is angry can be one of the greatest gains that a person has. You have the ability to vent your anger. Just for the sake of Allah, remain silent. This is so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it might be better than a person giving up the entire business. Because to give money away is nice, because it means the person will become famous. People will sacrifice wealth for the sake of fame, right? And so a person might think that their spiritual path is in giving away wealth, but they don't realize that it's being. So that's why we have private privilege club cards and VIP and this and that. But they spend money because for the sake of money we buy the business class ticket, even though sometimes on certain airlines that used to the business class flight is more uncomfortable than the economy, but just so that you know what you can be told, come to the front of the plane, right? So people will sacrifice wealth for the sake of status, but they won't sacrifice status for the sake of wealth. So gains are proportionate to the risks taken. Whoever risks something precious acquires something precious in return. In the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, no one gives up anything at all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except that Allah will substitute him with something better in return. Right? And if you want the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of the Prophet ﷺ, then we have to give up those things which we love. And this is very, very, very difficult. Right? Sometimes, and many, many times, we think we know, and we even might have the same, yes, I'm ready for the spiritual path. But when a person is actually called to account, and now they really have to give up, that is when we realize it. And therefore, we never make claims. And the dua we always have to make is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This used to be the du'as of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma kla'na kla'at al-walid. Ya Allah, take us and care for us like how a mother who has an infant child, meaning, Ya Allah, carry us to you without us having to make any effort. Bring us to you because of your love for us, without us having to prove anything, without us having to prove ourselves to you, without us having to make any effort, right? Meaning, to put it in this thing, in the spiritual path as well, we'll say, right? Ya Allah, treat us like a spoiled brat, right? Make us your spoiled brats. We know when a father or mother has spoiled brat, what happens? They let anything go. The child can cause a problem, they'll still buy him what he wants. That love for the child is overwhelming. In the spiritual path, we have people like this as well, right? Even they're known to be people of Allah, and they can even have bad characters. They'll do, but they're beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so gaining favor with Allah, or being beloved to Allah, is not based on what we do, but it's because if Allah loves someone, khalas, end of story. Allah loves them, irrespective of what they do. Right? Imam al-Haddad, obviously he was blind, and so one day two brothers come to greet him, and the one brother is standing in front of the other brother. And so when they come to greet him, Imam al-Haddad takes the hand of the one brother, doesn't shake his hand, he holds it, and he shakes the hand of the other brother first. And then he shakes the hand of this brother. And obviously he wants to make a point. And they were two people on the spiritual path as well. But he now wants to make manifest who is on a higher spiritual station, so there can even be this understanding and respect for whoever Allah has chosen. So out of this is Imam al-Haddad, we want to learn what was the wisdom in behind it. He says, there's a difference between someone who loves Allah, and there's a difference between someone whom Allah loves them. Right? Some people want Allah because they love Allah and they are striving, but other people, Allah loves them, and so therefore He will bring them to Himself. Right? And there is a huge difference. Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was one of these people. Allah loved him, not because of anything that he did, or because he was Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And this is what is istifa, that is what is Allah's choice. When Allah chooses to love someone, we have to then respect that person, and this is who the awliya are. Not because of, oh mashallah, they've got, they're doing this in a particular way and he smiled at me or he treated me. If they are beloved to Allah, they are beloved to Allah, irrespective of what manifests from them. Therefore, they wouldn't say, and this is who the people of Badr were. Allah chose them and He loved them and He raised them to the highest stations. What did He say? It doesn't matter what they do after today. I have forgiven them. Right? When that Sahabi who was a Badri committed what we would know as treason, which the punishment is supposed to be death. Hatib bin Abi Balta, right? And he wrote the letter exposing the secret of the Prophet ﷺ, that he was coming to Mecca to conquer right? We know the story. This was the worst type of sin that could, this type of, not just against the personage of the Prophet ﷺ, but against the entire state, the entire ummah, right? And then when he's exposed, when he comes in, the letter is brought by Sayyidina Ali back to the Prophet ﷺ. Now he's exposed Sayyidina Umar. We know Sayyidina Umar wants to take his head off immediately because he accuses him of hypocrisy, accuses him of treason, accuses him of all of these things. And what does the Prophet ﷺ say? And that is actually the hadith which manifests the station of the people of Badr. And says, leave him, O Umar, he partook in Badr. And what do you know of those who partook in Badr? Allah said to them, do as you wish, I have forgiven you. اعملوا ما شئتم فقد غفرت لكم. So when one gains the station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they say even their sayyi'at fi da'irat al-afu, even their wrongdoings are in the circle of forgiveness. Overlooked. Right? And what does it also mean? It means that they won't fall into anything wrong except that Allah will then guide them to sincere tawbah and repentance. Or they will not pass away until they have a complete clean slate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they have been raised. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was known to be someone of we say in Arabic a fast tongue, meaning he would be quick to anger sometimes with his tongue. And if he was angry, he would maybe say something against that person. And his daughter said Nasha inherited that from him as well, right? And the stories, we see the stories in the seerah and in her life as well. So one day he had a discussion or an argument with a certain Sahabi. I think the Sahabi is Sayyidina Bilal or Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, I'm not sure of the name. So he mentioned something, and the Arabic word says sab. Sab in Arabic, we translate it as swearing, but not necessarily swearing. I mean, he said something against him, something that was unbecoming. And immediately he realizes, right, that he said something. So he tells that Sahabi, now return that word to me, means say the same thing back to me. So it is equal. And the Sahabi says, no, I cannot do that. So you swear someone, you tell them, no, swear me back. No, I can't swear. He says, do the same to me, otherwise I'm going to complain to you to the Prophet. So if we had to look at the situation and say who's right and who's wrong, we say the other Sahabi is right? And say Abu Bakr is wrong. And the Sahabi says, no, I cannot disparage you in the same way you disparaged me. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr goes to the Prophet and complains and says, I said this to this person, he refused to. The Prophet calls him. Now, the judgment. What does the Prophet say? He says, do not harm me with regards to Abu Bakr. He believed in me when no one believed in me. He helped me when no one else helped me. And he starts mentioning all the virtues of Sayyidina Abu Bakr. So even those things which he does, whatever, fi dairatul af, it's forgiven. Right? His station with Allah is beyond. You cannot compete with him in his station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all these tit for tats and whatever, I did this, I did that, this is nothing when it comes to people that have station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whoever risks something precious acquires something precious in return. Those who treat their transactions with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lightly and neglect to prepare properly to draw close to their Lord, the mighty and majestic, are like those presenting worthless offerings to a king. They will regret it when their offerings is presented before the sovereign and the efforts will end in failure. Right? And so for example, if a person knows that, and there's a story that they tell about this, that there was a certain king who wanted to know the respect that the subjects had in his court, or the subjects that he was ruling over, the respect that they had for him. And so he requested from all of his subjects, and you know how it is in the past, people would pay lip service to the king, and you are, and this and that, whatever. And so he builds a basin, right, in which it is impossible to see what is inside. And he tells people that my request from you is to bring me the best honey that you have, right? And we are requesting that each subject in our domain, in the lands that we live, comes and they offer even just one jar of honey. This is the request from the king. The reason and whatever, right? We take the wisdom of the story. And so what it means, people have to come, they have to climb up a certain ladder, pour the honey inside, and then go their way, right? And this continues for a couple of months. People are coming from all over the land to pay their dues to the king, right? And after months, then the king, he calls all of the subjects, and he opens a stopper at the bottom of the straw, and what comes out? There's just water and water and water and water, water that's flowing, right? How many people actually gave honey? Very, very, very few, right? They all thought, we'll come, we'll do something, we'll go away. Everyone's thinking, mashallah, everyone else is, my 1 cup of honey, my 1 cup of water is not going to make a big difference. But everyone is giving, there was more water than, honey, right? And this is an exposure. But don't we treat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like that with our ibadah? Right? We come with our half-heartedness, we come with our negligence, we don't concentrate in our salah. And they would say the example of that is like a person, generally in the past also, when there were slaves, they would bring slave girls to the king, slave women to the king as a gift, right? In the name of slavery. Now, Imam Ghazali also mentions about this. He says, now imagine you've brought the gift of a slave girl to the king, but she's a dead corpse. What benefit is that going to be? He says, the way we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our ibadah is exactly the same. We don't bring life to that ibadah, we don't bring presence of heart and mind. It's like coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and presenting a dead corpse. What will be the reward for that? Now, and so if a person fails to prepare, then they will regret on the day, either on the day of Qiyamah, or they will regret in their lifetime. So awaken to your true self, dear brother or sister or reader, and aspire to what is lofty. Stay clear of the path of the incapable who make empty claims. Also, dear brother or sister or reader, stay away from the reprehensible behaviors practiced by those with flaws and deficiencies, who indulge in showing off and shameful acts like dancing and clapping. Among the lowly actions that the idle treat as acts of devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are dancing, clapping, pretending to be in spiritual ecstasy, uttering loud cries, and behaving in an undignified manner in religious gatherings. These are behaviors that tarnish one's integrity, strip away modesty, and erase dignity. And obviously, this the author is mentioning because, and we have to mention something of what is known as the spiritual practices that certain groups do. And everything has its fake and everything has its genuine. So, for example, you have people that are negligent. Now what happens is people come to the spiritual path, they start attending gatherings, right? So now we're attending a gathering. And while that qasida is being sung, or while the verse of the Quran is being read, what happens? A person is like, Imam Ghazali, you'll be taken to account for that. Was it done sincerely? Where did it come from? Did you want people to think, mashallah, there's something, there's something coming on my heart, I can, right? I'm connecting with the qasida, or something's happening with me, between me and Allah. Even an right, can be done insincerely in a gathering, right? Over and above, if a person then is tearing, over and above, if a person then shouts out. And then even in the practices of the spiritual practices that people would do, right? This was maybe something small. It would lead. There are states then which the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala went through, which were states of ecstasy, which they would be overtaken with love or overtaken with a certain spiritual state, that they would lose consciousness of where they are. So what happens? They would state, what is ecstasy? When someone's happy, what happens? They start dancing, they start clapping, they start doing. So in a state thinking about whatever was being recited in the love of Allah, the love of the Prophet ﷺ, and some of these gatherings, if you have to listen to some of the poetry, right? It's extremely moving. A person has to really even contain themselves if they are really connecting with some of these meanings. But what would happen naturally sometimes with certain people is they'd lose it, right? So they'd get up, they'd shout, right? Some of them would even behave in a way which might be unbecoming. And it was said this person is ma'adhur if he was doing that out of sincerity. But what happens? You find people that then came to gatherings and they saw someone doing this and they thought, but now everyone's going to think this guy is, I must do the same thing. So he starts pretending to have these spiritual states and, this ecstasy, and he starts doing this so that people may think of him that he has a state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what happens? Sometimes this became the norm. So people who come to the gatherings and they all start doing that. And now you don't know who's sincere and who's insincere. So the author is actually disparaging these types of people. But we have to also recognize that there are gatherings in which these things happen, in which the person is excused. And it is the duty of the shaykh, whoever is running those gatherings, to warn people, right? So there's even a story of Shaykh Bakr bin Salim, one of the mashayikh, and they would have their gatherings of dhikr, and these qasidas would be sung. And On that particular day, one person stands up in a bout of ecstasy and whatever he's doing, and two or three other people stand up and they start doing the same thing. And the Shaykh realizes, and obviously with the Sa'ad al-Ba'alawi, Imam al-Haddad also is very particular. He says, we don't stand up, we don't move to any strenuous movements in our gatherings. But we recognize that other gatherings and other spiritual paths, they have that as part of their spiritual path, and they have, and it has sanction in the Sharia. There's difference of opinion with regards to the ulama, with regards to certain things. Sometimes, and now it's even, one can see online as well, certain times, they call it the hadara in Turkey, that the whirling dervishes in Turkey, some of the hadara, they would sit in a circle and, they would move up and down. And naturally, when someone's reading Quran, what are they doing? They're waving. So the mashayikh would sometimes use this as a way to bring people into presence, right? And it has its sanction, their approach, just as there are differences of opinion with regards. We respect the opinions of those who do it. We don't speak out against them, and we expect them also to respect our opinions, who we say we don't maybe necessarily agree with it. And also, if a person is in a gathering where this is happening, he doesn't have to attend, right? And we would even hear some of the mashayikh saying that if you are in a gathering and everyone is doing that, you just take your place behind. When Habib Umar was recently even in Chechnya, I think so, right? They have a very, very vibrant way of doing dhikr, and they actually, they stomp in the ground, walk in. And Habib Umar attended, but he sat on the side, and he let them do what they were doing, and he smiled at them as well. Right? So there is sanction for this. We can't be dogmatic to say this, and because they are ulama, they are awliya, they are people that have, they are scholars that have written about these things. And so he said, Shaykh Bakr bin Salim told him that whoever stands up in these bouts of ecstasy tomorrow in the gathering, they will get the whip. And so the next day, or it must have been the son of Shaykh Bakr bin Salim, Hussein bin Shaykh Bakr bin Salim, he tells the disciples that, so the next day, when the qasidas are being recited, everything, that same person that stood up the first day, he stands up, and the other people don't stand up. He says he's the only one that has permission now to do it. Because he wasn't scared of the whip, meaning he wasn't even aware of the whip. It was overwhelming. And this is exactly what sometimes Mawlana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, even when he wrote about the very disputed thing, the standing in the Mawlid, right? When the prophetic seerah is being recited, right? Again, difference of opinion. Some ulama allow it, some ulama don't allow it. We respect. When we come to gatherings, it's being done. Allow people to do things they're comfortable with. Don't force people to do what they're not, right? And we have to have this expansiveness. We can't be fighting about these nitty-gritty things, which the scholars of the past have forever spoken about. And every year, the month of Rabi al-Awwal, the debate starts all over. Is Mawlid permissible? Is Mawlid not permissible? Is it permissible to stand in the Mawlid? Is not permissible to stand in the Mawlid? We need to get beyond these things, right? We have to understand what differences of opinion in the Ummah. Allah has allowed differences of opinion in the Ummah, right? And there will always be practices or things that we incline towards, things we don't. You like it, do it. You don't like it, don't do it. End of story. The whole world's not going to come to your particular way. The whole world's not going to come to my particular way. So even Mawlana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, when he was writing about this, because the manifestations of the way, irrespective of, there's manifestations in which things which are haram, which may be manifested in East Asia at the time, intermingling, wasting, etc., right? But the way the prophetic seerah and the Mawlid was done, even in certain parts of the Arab world, etc., in Tareem, they would read the Quran, they read some poetry, right, in praise of the Prophet ﷺ. The Shaykh gives a talk and they make dua. Nothing, is Quran impermissible? Of course not. Is qasidas impermissible? No. Right? Is giving a talk impermissible? No. Is making dua impermissible? No. So why, if it's all together, now it becomes impermissible? So there's nothing impermissible with regards to that. Right? But even the standing up, then there's a whole debate about whether the standing in. So the mashayikh would mention, even those that disagree with it, they would say, if it's done out of ecstasy, if it's done out of a state of, when you're following the story of the seerah of the Prophet and coming to his birth, now what happens? Right? A person is given to standing up out of respect of the story and the recalling about the birth of the Prophet. Then he says, this person has an excuse. The Prophet stood up for a Jewish person who had passed away. His dead body was being brought. The Prophet stood up and said, does he not have a soul? Right? And then obviously these things, there are differences of opinion. When people attend the gathering and it is being, they shouldn't be forced to conform to certain things. Those that have these gatherings must also be wise. If they're having these gatherings and they know people in a particular locality area, they shouldn't force the issue with them, right? We have to be able to get along. And until we can sit at the same table with our differences, right? And being able to sit at the table and get along with someone, even though we know there are things that we differ on, this is the greatest sign of a refined heart and a refined character. And the greatest manifestation of a polluted heart and polluted character is we disparage people, right? We have this attitude of my way or the highway, and we're not able to get along. And what happens? We become causes of dissension and disunity. Whereas the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is to bring people together, right? And sometimes even Imam Ghazali would even speak about this, that there are certain things which in telling people is not correct. If it leads to something that is worse, it means people are going to fall into something that is greater, or it will lead to a greater harm, then you can't do that at the moment. There has to be another way, there's wisdom in how we bring people. So even solving the ills of society requires wisdom, right? It's not just that everyone everyone can just speak their mind. In fact, they would say that the ills of society are never sorted out just through the tongue, right? But what is it sorted? It's sorted out by people doing work on the ground, sitting, discussing with people, right? What happens when these issues have festered for centuries and centuries, right? And what happens? We just continue to, where are the people that are going to raise and say, you know what, enough is enough now, right? We as an ummah have to start going forward. Habib Bakr al-Adani would bemoan the fact, and he would say, right, we arguing over these things. And for example, in certain lands where he was from, right, these groups would be fighting with each other, right? And sometimes it would lead to fist fights. And he says, the hospital in your city also is not even a proper hospital. The roads are not even made. The sewage is not even functioning properly. Where's the efforts to raise the academic level, to raise the spiritual level of people, right? To assist the downtrodden. That's where the effort needs to come. But one of the ploys of shaitan, one of the ploys of the enemies of Islam, as mentioned by Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Bhuti, right, is one of the goals, the planned, documented goals, is just to keep the ummah in fighting, right? And therefore there will always continue to be wars in the Middle East, right? Putting this group up with the other group. Even when the colonialists came and they split the Muslim lands, what did they do? Right? They always left a disputed plot of land, right? Between Syria and Jordan and Israel and the Golan Heights. Between India and Pakistan, they left Kashmir. Between Sudan, right? These are the trump cards, right? Put them up to each other. When the need is, when the ummah starts developing, people starting to, come right, they just stoke these fires and these flames, and they start farriq tasud, the famous old rule, divide and rule. And what's the only thing that's going to solve these problems is when we come from a pure place, from a pure heart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and to allow us to practice. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us to account for anything which we read or we say and we are unable to practice. We ask Him to forgive us, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify the hearts of the entire ummah, right? All of those who are living on the face of the earth, right? And there are people who are concerned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests also even sometimes with people that are non-Muslims, right? Where they have concern for the well-being of humanity, and they are concerned with regards to people's hearts as well. And the dua also, the people that have any concern like this, they make effort that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them into alignment with the true message, bring them into alignment with the light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that no person that's on the face of the earth that has stood up for any right, especially if they have spoken, or even if they realize and they've done anything for the sake of justice, right, and for the sake of the correctment of their societies or even for their own hearts, and make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them and align their hearts with the light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa sallallahu alaihi wa sallam wa ala al-musannif وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.